The River Jordan, contrary to legend, it's neither deep nor wide. But as a boundary separating Israelis and Jordanians since the war between them last June, it still remains a barrier between conquerors and conquered. The old Allenby crossing was destroyed by the Jordanian army when it fled from the Israeli army. Today, a new bridge spans the river. Jordanian and Israeli sentries, scarcely more than a cricket pitch apart, control the processions of the victims of that war. Every move the refugees make across this bridge is decisive, for the tensions of a ceasefire make return uncertain. Tonight, World in Action looks at the problem of the refugees, the people for whom the Allenby crossing is the long bridge. This is the only place where Arabs of any nationality are permitted to leave the territory now occupied by Israel. Today they still come, the second exodus in 20 years, into Jordan, where 1 person in every 3 is already a refugee, or the child of a refugee from the war fought over the foundation of Israel in 1948. In the days that followed the war last June, 200,000 Arabs crossed the Jordan. At present they arrive at a rate of about 100 a day, and the Israelis, with no wish to cherish a large Arab population in their midst, make no effort to stop them. Why they come is uncertain. The Israelis say that no pressure is used to drive them away, but the Arabs themselves often tell different stories, of persuasion, even of violence. The Israelis deny these tales, and indeed it's more likely they are the efforts of simple people to explain convincingly why they've decided to leave their homes.
Why did he come?
ليش جيت؟ طردوني اليهود. The Israelis forced him out of his home.
How did they do that?
كيف عملوا؟ كيف طردوك؟
طردوا يضرب جارك وجنبك ويجي لازم يجيب سلاح يطشه بالماسوره قدام يطلع منه انا بشوفه بشرد والثاني بيشرد.
The Israeli army forced him out of his home and his house.
يعني فروا وسط المخيمات بالدار بيخشوا عليه.
They come in their houses and they force
واللي
him
بيلقوا
out.
حاجه مليحه ذهب نسوان بيسحبوه.
They harass them and they torture them.
They tortured him?
Yes. Yeah, they torture him.
How did they torture him?
They hit him with the steel bars.
And what about his family? Were his family hurt?
عيلته كان أبت.
عيلتي؟
ناس انجرح منهم انضربوا.
في انجرح كثير.
Yeah, yes.
وفي مات بالمره والله.
Some of them died.
How many of his family has he brought with him?
قديش جبت معك من عيلتك لهون؟ كم واحد؟ كم نفر؟
جبت من عيلتي هاي المرأة والولاد الأربعة هذول.
4 أولاد ومرأة.
بس.
He brought his wife and 4 children.
"74,000 of the new refugees live in tented camps in the Jordan Valley. They're looked after by the Relief and Works Agency of the United Nations in collaboration with the Jordan government and a score of voluntary associations. Their mood is of anger and despair. But the majority of the new refugees have settled in the towns of Jordan, and especially in the capital, Amman. A few of them, with nowhere else to go, have pitched their tents in the open spaces of the city. Here, puzzled and angry at being uprooted for a second time, they are sharp-tempered and don't take kindly to strangers. Some of them regarded World in Action with grave suspicion. Either you stop them filming, they told a policeman, or else we smash their camera.
اقسم بالله بخلع الواحد بكسر وجهه. كيف بخلع الواحد؟ ما فيش بالشارع يسوي يجي عند الخيمه يسوره. شو بتحكي انت؟
شو بدك في اسمه؟ احكي معي انا. شايف كيف؟ ممنوع بدي.
But at the University of Jordan, the refugees were calmer, though we did question their realism.
It is not a matter of realism, it is a feeling inside us. We feel that we had once home in Jerusalem, and we're now looking for homes. We remember our old home, and we like to go to our home. Because when you get in contact with the land, with your home, with even small animals, you like to remember them. We feel it inside. We've been brought up since childhood with the feeling that our home was stolen.
Maybe we said that we are going to drive the Jews into the sea, but we never intended to drive them into the sea. We only wanted our rights, and we were too emotional about that score, so we said that we wanted to drive them into the sea, and it was a horrible mistake we made.
We can solve the problem by peace and not by war. If all the world understand our problems really, with its realities, not as the Jews or the Zionism tries to show this problem for the world. They are calling that we Arabs, we are fond of wars, we do like wars, but this is not real. We like peace, peace with justice.
One consequence of last year's war has been an increase in Jordan's school population. The number of pupils has doubled, and in this particular school there are now 1,500 girls instead of 650. They work a double shift, and every change of shift is a tiny riot. Politics has overflowed into the classroom, and those who claim that Arab governments indoctrinate their children against Israel quote scenes like this. These girls are singing a song of war, urging their men to go off and fight for a Palestine that vanished when the State of Israel was created, before these girls were even born. The wisdom of teaching school children war songs is obviously questionable, but they're defended by their teacher, herself a refugee.
Well, this is what the girls all feel, that Palestine is theirs and that any time they are ready to do anything to go back and take Palestine back for them. And with the new refugees from the Western Bank, although they had great troubles, but they are very enthusiastic and ambitious, and they are always ready to do anything in study or work or encouraging their parents or brothers that Palestine is theirs and they'll be ready to go there. And this is what we try, the staff and myself, we always try to make the children think of Palestine and their homeland, because many of them, when they left, they were very young, or even they were born after the catastrophe. So they know nothing about Palestine or their homeland. So we always try to put this in their mind and make them think that they will be going back to Palestine soon.
In the new tented schools near the River Jordan, the mood is exactly the same. Here all the children have crossed the river in the last 7 months. Today, as well as reading, writing and arithmetic, they are encouraged by their teachers to recite their tiny poems of war. O Palestine, we will sacrifice our soul for you and free you from the enemy. We shall never sit and rest until we liberate you, for Allah is greater than all the Jews. Perhaps the most constructive aspect of United Nations work among the refugees is in its 79 clinics which care for the most tragic victims of any war, the children. Sadia is 13 months old. She weighs only 11.5 pounds. The average weight of a child her age is 21 pounds.
You see, it is skin on bone, no muscles at all. The face is like an old person face, due to the loss of muscles of the face and the fatty tissue, subcutaneous fatty tissue. She didn't develop edema yet, but it may develop in the future if she continues without treatment. The hair is dropping also due to anemia.
Kerami is a camp in the Jordan Valley which houses 27,000 refugees, most of them made homeless by the war of 1948. It looks like a permanent Arab town. A few weeks ago, on the afternoon of November the 20th, Kerami was shelled by the Israelis. These were anti-personnel shells, and 20 men and women died, then or later. At this corner cafe, a shell fragment burst through the straw roof, pierced a Pepsi-Cola advertisement, and smashed the chair where the 60-year-old cafe owner was sitting. He died at once. The people of Kerami were frightened and puzzled. They could hardly ask the Israelis why their camp was shelled, but World in Action, able to visit both sides, could ask that question of the Israeli officer commanding the Jordan front, General Nakis.
I'll tell you, they had a company of a military company of army within this camp, and we didn't want to harm harm civilians. It was only by par hasard, as the French say, and personally, and I'm not the only one, we are sorry for it.
For the dead and wounded, the General's apology has come too late, and such incidents as this are one reason why so many refugees are cynical about the possibility of peace between Israel and Jordan. The refugees themselves are poorly educated and inarticulate, but they have their spokesman.
We Arabs, and Palestinians in particular, are very much attached to our country. The soil of our country is very dear to us. Jaffa and Haifa and Ramli and Lidda and Majdal and Gaza are very dear cities to us. And I have come across cases. I once was taking some visitors around when we met a man of 80 years of age. And I was telling him, what's your ambition in life, my dear? And he said, explain to your visitors, Mr. Nashashibi, my ambition is to go back to my village, catch its soil in my hand, and die afterwards.
Some refugees are going back, but they're still outnumbered by those leaving for Jordan. Here, on the Israeli side of the river, World in Action was told that not all those leaving are refugees. It's claimed that many leave of their own accord for personal or economic reasons. Nevertheless, they trickle across the Allenby Bridge and into the refugee camps at the rate of 100 a day. Permission to return is granted by the Israeli authorities in cooperation with the Jordanians and the International Red Cross to some of the refugees who become separated from their families. Permits are granted to women, children, and men above military age who have relations in the occupied areas.
السلام عليكم. أهلا مرحبا أخويا أهلا وسهلا. كيف حالك؟
One repatriated refugee is 68-year-old Abdul Harim Muhammad. We asked him why he'd come back.
Well,
this is his place, and he has vineyards, and he has his home in close to Hebron, to Bethlehem. That's why he came back.
When did he go over in the first place?
امتى رحت لعمان؟
رحت في شهر 7 بعدين سألنا مدير البوسطة في عمان
عارف.
قال ما في.
طيب.
رحت للكويت.
He went on July, on the month of July. He went.
During the war?
وقت الحرب.
لا بعد الحرب.
After the war.
بعد الحرب.
After the war.
بعد.
And he went just to see his son.
بعد الحرب.
ورحت بس تشوف ابنك.
بس اشوف ابني.
He went to see only his son, and suddenly it was closed.
يعني ما فيش.
Is he glad to be back?
لا ما شردتش إشراج أبدا.
لا فرحان إنه راجع.
معلوم فرحان.
Of course he is very glad.
200,000 refugees crossed into Jordan during and after the June war, of whom about 125,000 applied for permits to return. The Israeli government issued permits for 20,000, of whom 15,000 have returned. Abdul Harim Muhammad is one of the lucky ones. Over 1/3 of a million Arabs have been full citizens of Israel for the last 20 years. They live in towns like Baqqa, which has been part of Israel since 1948. We asked the mayor of Baqqa, himself a Palestinian Arab, whether he thought the Arabs could live in peace with the Jews.
Well, the fact that the Arabs can live with the Jews together in Israel, it's a fact that there are proofs from the time of the Turks that they live together in peace.
Do you in any way feel that as an Arab you are a second-class citizen in Israel?
وبسألك إذا أنت بتحس إنه زي عربي، إذا أنت ذات يعني الدرجة إنه زي يهودي إسرائيلي.
ما فيش فرق بين عربي ويهودي عند الدولة.
There is no difference among Jews and Arabs to the government of Israel.
Israeli armored cars constantly patrol the occupied territories, keeping the peace and on the lookout for Arab saboteurs who still operate every day behind the Israeli lines. At a military prison a few miles from Jerusalem, World in Action filmed for the first time some of the men who've been captured in recent months. To the Israelis, these men are terrorists and murderers, but to the Arabs, they are freedom fighters, brave men who still carry on the war to liberate the land they lost last June. Their existence is one of the main reasons why Israel is cautious in allowing the return of refugees. A harmless-looking Arab crossing the river by day may turn into a lethal commando by night. In an attempt to deter the commando activities, the Israelis have taken measures which have been criticized by some outside observers. Qalqilia is a large Jordanian town which stood on the frontier with Israel. For 20 years, the Israelis claimed that it was being used as a base for raids on their territory. After its capture during the June War, a decision was taken to make an example of Qalqilia. The population was first evacuated, and then many of their houses were systematically destroyed by explosives. The people were then allowed to return, and they now live in the ruins. But 4,000 chose not to. They became refugees. The Israeli government has now promised to rebuild Qalqilia, but Arab leaders feel punitive measures like these are hardly likely to win the affection or cooperation of a population defeated in war. All over the occupied Jordanian territories, the Israelis are building new roads. Some Arabs interpret this as a sure sign that the victors intend to stay. This fear of a permanent occupation has increased the number of refugees, but those Arabs who have stayed have benefited. Many are now fully employed for the first time and are earning higher wages than ever before. But to the Arabs, a more serious sign of a permanent occupation is the creation of Israeli settlements like Etzion in the occupied territories. For 20 years, this tree marked the village of Etzion, where 130 Jewish settlers were massacred by the Arabs in the war of 1948. When the ceasefire line was drawn, it became part of Jordan. The children who were evacuated before the final battle have now come back to Etzion to re-establish a Jewish settlement. Already they've started to clear the fields which their parents once farmed. Today, Etzion is inside occupied Jordan. To the Jews, it's a symbol of courage and tenacity. But to many Jordanians, it's a realization of their fears that the Israelis, having won the war, have now come to stay, and that there is no longer a place for them in the occupied areas. Sandy Zussman is an American girl who has come to build this new village.
But there is a problem that this kibbutz is not in Israel. This kibbutz is in occupied Jordanian territory.
Now it's in Israel.
Do you think it's going to stay like that?
I know it's going to stay like that.
Don't you think this is going to cause political problems, extra political problems?
There's always political problems, but that's not going to stop us from staying here. This was our land in the beginning, and it's ours now, and it's going to stay ours.
But this is the same argument the Arabs are using on the other side, that the land which you now occupy in Israel was their land.
Everybody can see now that it's ours. It's ours again. It was returned to us. It's ours.
If and when peace talks open between the Jordanians and the Israelis, the settlement at Etzion will obviously cause additional problems. Why was the decision taken to establish it? Weldon Action asked Israel's Foreign Minister, Abba Eban.
Well, why shouldn't there be a kibbutz at Kfar Etzion in any kind of situation? We have who says that there are areas here in which Jews cannot be allowed to live?
Because it is Jordanian territory.
Well, is there a principle that there is a state which is completely Judenrein? I've never heard of that. There's no other country in the world which establishes that principle.
But are you not here making a political problem unnecessarily?
I don't think it's unnecessarily. It is legitimate for Israel to claim a different frontier than that which existed under the armistice demarcation lines. It is juridically and politically legitimate for us to want a different frontier because we've never had frontiers. There's never been a frontier mutually recognized as a national boundary.
Now this is obviously what the Arabs are afraid of, though. I mean, they do seem to be expressing a legitimate fear, in the midst of all the exaggeration which goes with it, that Israel is an expansionist nation.
No, but their territorial claims are much more fundamental than ours. Their territorial claims, as far as I understand, apply to the whole of Israel.
As the Israelis have moved into some of the conquered territory, the Arabs have moved out. This camp at Jericho had a population of 20,000 until last June. They were the refugees of the 1948 war. Today, they're refugees for the second time. The camp is empty. Its population fled across the River Jordan before the advancing Israeli army. The flags of truce still hang vainly from the empty houses, and the refugees took with them only what they could carry. Now only the cats remain, the big ones to eat the little ones. This deserted camp is a mute testament to the gravity of the refugee problems which the politicians have to overcome. Dr. Hatem Al-Zubi is the Jordanian Minister for Economic Affairs.
The solution has been very clear to us, has been very clear to the world in general. It has been very clear to the United Nations. The solution is for them to go back. We've asked for this. It has been our avowed policy, and it has been the subject of resolutions in the General Assembly as well as in the Security Council. The only solution we believe in is for the repatriation of the refugees to the West Bank of Jordan, to their homes, back to their camps.
There's never been a war in history which has not had tragic human consequences. I don't think, however, that we should exaggerate the scope of this problem. There have been very few wars of such fury and scope in which civilian populations have suffered less. Now, what are called the new refugees, I think that definition ought to be looked at with more criticism. In many cases, they're not refugees at all, but they are people, most of whom left after the war under no pressure of military fear, of their own accord, for reasons which they hold and still which they held valid. There was the economic reason, for example, to be near to their bank accounts on the other side of the Jordan or in the Arab world.
Are you prepared to allow back into Israeli territory those who fled in 1948?
Well, our position on the refugee problem is this, that there is no country at all which can by itself solve a problem of such complexity and of such massive dimensions. The problem can only be solved by regional and international cooperation. If there is an international and regional effort to solve this problem, then Israel will contribute to that solution.
In what way? In money or in acceptance of repatriation?
Nothing is closed. We are willing to sit down with the Arab governments tomorrow and see how we jointly solve this problem. To some extent, to a very large extent, of course, it depends on the prior solution of the political problem, peace and frontiers. The people whose lives have been disrupted by these wars have certainly suffered a fate which they individually did not deserve. War is the cause of this problem. Peace is the only solution to it.
But Arabs and Israelis doubt each other's sincerity about wanting peace. Both suspect the other of territorial ambitions. The dilemma has been best stated by the Deputy Commissioner General of the United Nations Agency for Arab Refugees, John Redaway.
If it is true that there can be no lasting peace in the Middle East without a settlement of the refugee problem, it is also true that there can be no real solution of the refugee problem except in the context of a general peace settlement.